Welcome back. Well, despite criticism of the enormous costs of the Iraq War, some have benefited from it. Take, for example, the hordes of private military companies who have reaped enormous profits. Today, private military contractors are earning billions of dollars in Iraq, working alongside the military. Their work is paid for by taxpayers. One company, Britain's Aegis, was awarded $293 million for a single contract by the US Pentagon. The value of Halliburton's Iraq contracts to date has topped the $10 billion mark. Others have also claimed, including President Bush, that increased military spending has in fact created more jobs. We're still joined by our guests in Washington, D.C., political consultant and Republican strategist Jack Burkman. Also in Washington, D.C., Phyllis Bennis, director of the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. And in London, Salah Hashemi, lawyer from the Iraqi League in the United Kingdom. Thank you all for being with us. If I could start with Jack, because you were edging to get a word in there. There was a point made earlier by Phyllis that basically no one's really benefited from this war despite the talk of profits other than the CEOs and the top executives.
Well, the Iraqis have benefited, the U.S. has benefited, and I think the world has benefited. And there's nothing wrong with defense contractors making money. I mean, those people are over there doing dangerous work. I mean, all of the big contractors have had deaths. They've all suffered deaths, just like the U.S. military. So I see no problem with them. Comparing the pay of various contractors to the pay of soldiers, that has no relevance. We don't have anybody conscripted in the military. Everybody over there is there because they volunteered in the U.S. Army. There is no draft. There is no conscription. So those arguments, I think, have no merit at all.
All right, Phyllis, are you overlooking perhaps what some would call the positive effects of this war, job creation?
No, I don't think these are the jobs we want. We want jobs building houses in New Orleans. We want jobs for teachers teaching kids. We don't need jobs to make better bullets. What we're seeing, for example, David Brooks, who was arrested not too long ago, the CEO of a company that made its fortune providing body armor for U.S. troops, and his salary went from a very hefty $800,000 a year to over $70 million in 1 year. And it turned out that the life-saving vests were not accurate. They were not made to work. They were a failure, and U.S. troops died as a result. So, you know, this is a serious kind of problem that we have when we're looking at a war to make money. This was a war that should not have been fought, and if we look at who has benefited, it has been the CEOs of major military corporations, it has been the oil companies, it has not been the American people, it has not been the Iraqi people, and it's not been people in other countries either. I think it's not surprising that other governments are refusing to pay for this war. They don't believe
Phyllis,
that this is a war that has made the world safer. This is a war that has made the world far riskier.
Okay, I'm sorry, I want to jump in there. I do want to go to get a view from Iraq. We'll go over to Salah Hashemi. About 2 years into this war...
May I just respond?
Okay, go ahead briefly.
Yeah. May I just respond to a very important point made by your guest, Jack? I think he said, and those were his words, that the global economy should start contributing to this war because it is maintaining the security of the world. Well, that's not correct. Maybe they would contribute if America had not made such a mess of things. I mean, it is the worst example one could make of maintaining security around the world. Iraq now is riddled with terrorists who were not there before. I'm sure he will dispute that. And it is absolutely nonsense to allow the global economy to contribute to this action. It's absolutely refuted.
All right, let's allow Jack to
then again
a brief rebuttal on that. Why would the world contribute, Jack, to a failed project?
There's another thing that I need to respond to, if I may.
First of all, I don't think it's a failed project. First of all, the fact that you have a large American army in the center of the Mideast has stabilized a lot of things. First, it has prevented a lot of new attacks on the U.S. I think generally it has stabilized a region that would be even worse today without an American presence. But the reality is the Europeans have an excuse for everything. They say they don't want to contribute to this because they view it as messed up. The Europeans don't want to contribute to anything. But I have a message for the French and the Germans. You know, someday, God forbid, somebody's going to go in and do something in Paris or Frankfurt or Berlin, and the Americans won't be there to help you. The Americans won't be there to avenge the problems, and the Americans won't be there to defend you. when somebody goes in and knocks over the Eiffel Tower or what have you. So the Europeans should keep this in mind when they're so high and mighty and want to let the Americans bear all the burden.
All right, let's try and move things forward a little bit.
I don't think that Europeans see that as a threat.
If we could go back to Salah Hashemi, about 2 years into this war, we heard a lot of allegations about corruption in the reconstruction process. There was organizations were set up to look into it, the Special Inspector for Iraq Reconstruction. Has anything changed since then?
Well, there's nothing has changed on the ground. Iraq has been labeled by the United Nations as the second most corrupt country in the world, second only, of course, to Haiti. And nothing has changed as far as I can see. Reconstruction is staggering, and the people of Iraq are suffering even worse off than 2003. So has there been any improvement after numerous investigations, in fact, even by Congress? I didn't see any changes on the ground, nor has the Iraqi people. In fact, a recent report suggests that only 5% of the Iraqi government's budget was spent on reconstruction. Where did the money go? If the Americans were interested, truly, to investigate this, I'm sure they would come up with the answers. But I think they would harm their allies in doing so. And that's the reason why those investigations have been stalled.
Right.
That's my view.
Phyllis Bennis, why does the issue of corruption and reconstruction seem to have fallen off the radar screen?
There's no political will in Washington from either party prepared to look into this seriously. The question of reconstruction is so fundamental to the idea of why there is any legitimacy for this war. This is the basis on which those last remaining defenders of this war, who are now a tiny minority in this country, where you have 71% of Americans being against the war, the minority who support the war still labor under the illusion that the U.S. is reconstructing Iraq. And for that reason, there's a great deal of resistance to acknowledging that not only the $8.8 billion that went missing in 2006, the other money that has gone missing from the reconstruction budgets that was simply never spent and then disappeared, this is not something that anyone in Washington is prepared to look at in a serious way.
Can I ask a basic question? Let me ask Phyllis a very basic question. Okay. What's your vision of the Mideast? Do you just want to leave dictators in place everywhere and stabilize it? Is that what you want to do? You sound like John Foster Dulles. Is that what you believe in? Stick dictators in, lock it down, stabilize it, and that's it?
We brought dictators into that region. We put dictators, including Saddam Hussein, in power and provide. Excuse me.
Okay,
if you're going to take over the role of
sorry, Jack.
interviewer,
Let's give her an opportunity to answer the question. We've answered the
this.
question. Let's give Phyllis an opportunity to answer it.
If we're serious about changing U.S. policy, it has to be one based on ending intervention, ending armed support of dictators, whether that be Saddam Hussein, with whom we had a very cozy relationship, provided not only money and targeting information to allow him to better use chemical weapons, but provided the seed stock for the biological program. That's the U.S. role vis-a-vis Saddam Hussein. Vis-a-vis the dictators in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or elsewhere, we have backed them up for years. The first thing the U.S. should do is get out and stop backing dictators.
All right, Jack Berkman, there is something to be said for the pick and choose game when it comes to backing and taking down dictators, isn't there?
Well, sure, she's right. We have backed dictators. Maybe we backed too many, but that's an argument for another day. My question to her was, what's your vision for the Mideast? If you're George Bush coming into power in 2001, you're looking at Saddam. Well, that's now. But I'm saying if you were George Bush coming into power 01, 02, you got Saddam after 9/11. You got Saddam sitting there. You have dictators all over the place. What do? Do you just leave it alone? Maybe George Bush wanted to make an effort to better the world.
I wrote a book about what George Bush should have done on 9/11, and it started with recognizing how much we need the international community, how we need to deal with issues that are crimes against humanity. Excuse me,
I'm sorry,
are you asking questions or not?
All right, I'm sorry, we are running out of time. There's plenty to talk about in this episode. But at this point, we will have to thank our guests for joining us in this episode of Inside Story. Phyllis Bennis from the Institute for Policy Studies, Jack Berkman, a Republican strategist, and Salah Hashemi from the Iraqi League in the United Kingdom. Thank you for being here. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. For now, it's goodbye.